In this video, we're going to go over measuring for your new pullouts. The first step is to decide how the pullout is going to be mounted into the cabinet. When possible, I like to mount the slides directly to the face frame and use rear sockets to mount to the back of the cabinet. On the hinge side of the cabinet, you need to see if the door or hinge is going to be in the way, in which case you'll need to use a spacer between the face frame and the slide. A half-inch spacer usually works fine. If you have hinges like this, there's no easy way to mount to the frame, so you'll need to use bottom-mounted feet. I also use feet if I remove the center stile because the front of the pullout needs to be behind the stile when the door is shut. You can also use feet if there's anything that protrudes behind the face frame, like hinges with springs or something attached to the door itself. In this first example, I'm going to measure a typical face frame cabinet. I'm measuring this one with the stile left in place. This would be the same way to measure if the cabinet only has a door on one side. It's important when measuring to make sure you leave enough room. If your measurement is a 1/16 of an inch too big, the pullout won't fit. To measure the opening, put the tape tight against the face frame on the hinge side and measure to the stile or the other face frame. In this example, the opening is 12 inches. With this type of hinge, we'll need to use a spacer so the slide will clear the hinge and the edge of the door. I usually use half-inch spacers, so the final measurement would be 11.5 inches. If the cabinet has two doors, it's sometimes hard to get an accurate measurement. To get an accurate measurement, I'll put the tape tight against the face frame and make a mark at 10 inches. Then I'll put the tape tight against the other side and measure to my mark. In this case, it's 17 inches. Add 10 to that and we have 27 inches. Since the door and hinges are in the way, I would use a half-inch spacer on each side, so our final opening width would be 26 inches. If you're using feet, the measurements don't have to be as exact. I just measure the distance between the hinges and usually subtract 1/4 of an inch to give me a little bit of wiggle room. Measuring a frameless European-style cabinet is pretty much the same, with just a couple of exceptions. European-style hinges tend to be bigger. I'll use a 3/4 inch spacer if the hinge is lower than 3 inches from the bottom of the cabinet and will hit the pullout. If you're using feet in a European-style cabinet with only one door, you need to leave at least 1/4 of an inch for the feet and screws on the non-hinged side. Now that we've measured the width, the next step is to measure the depth. To do that, all you need to do is measure from the back of the cabinet to the face frame. If you're mounting directly to the frame, take that measurement and subtract at least 1/2 inch for the rear sockets and screws. In this case, it would be about 22.5 inches. If you're removing a stile and need to mount behind the face frame, measure to the back of the face frame and subtract 1/2 inch. So in this case, I would order a 22-inch deep pullout. The next thing you need to look for is anything in the cabinet that might get in the way. Under sinks with a dishwasher, there's usually plumbing in the way. This is another case where I might use feet if I can't mount the slide to the back of the cabinet. Other times there might be something in the middle of the cabinet. In that case, I'll measure to the obstruction, then use longer slides that would still mount to the back of the cabinet. If you do that, make sure you make a note when you order that you need full depth slides. Also, you need to look to see if there's any electrical or gas lines in the way. You'll find this a lot on islands or under cooktops. One last situation is if you are measuring for drawers instead of pullouts. The width is easier because you just measure from one side of the opening to the other. You measure the depth the same as you would for a pullout. The last measurement we need is the height. If you're using side-mounted slides, take the height of the opening and subtract 1/2 inch. If you're using soft close undermount slides, you need to subtract 1 inch from the total height. You should now have all your measurements and be ready to place your order.